Welcome to Eclipse Stories. If you're a fan of spine-chilling tales, mysterious happenings, and true horror stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of the darkness. Join us and get ready for a thrilling ride through the unknown. Stay tuned for more stories that will send shivers down your spine. Let's dive into the story. I wasn't planning on stopping at a motel that night. In fact, if things had gone the way I thought they would, I'd still be in my own bed, in my own apartment, maybe even trying to patch things up with her. But sometimes life smacks you so hard across the face that the only thing you can do is run. That's exactly what I did after I walked in on my girlfriend and one of her coworkers tangled up in the sheets of the bed we were supposed to share. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there long enough for them to realize I'd seen it, then turned around, shoved a few clothes into a duffel, and left. I drove aimlessly for an hour, no destination in mind, just the glow of the headlights stretching across the dark road. It was late, and the gas stations and diners I passed felt too exposed. I wanted a place where nobody knew me, where I could collapse and let the silence swallow me for a while. That's how I found the motel, 15 miles out of town, just off the highway. Its old neon sign buzzed faintly like a fly trapped in a light fixture. The paint on the letters was peeling, but I could still read the word vacancy glowing faint red. It wasn't the first place I saw, but it was the first one that looked halfway safe. No broken windows, no figures lurking in the parking lot. Just a quiet building sitting under the hum of a street lamp. The clerk behind the front desk barely looked at me. He was in his 20s, maybe, hair hanging into his face, eyes glued to some tiny TV on the counter. When I asked for a room for the week, he just slid a card for me to fill out, gave me a key, and muttered something about the liquor store 2 blocks over. I nodded, though I didn't plan on going. At least, that's what I told myself. But when I got into the room, number 9, I still remember the faded gold plate on the door. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall until the emptiness turned heavy. That's when I caved and went to buy a couple bottles of vodka. I thought I'd drink myself into forgetting. Instead, I woke up the next morning with a pounding head, staring at the half-empty second bottle on the table, and realized that pouring it down the sink was smarter than trying to drown in it. The hours blurred after that. I ate a burger from a greasy place down the road, came back, showered, and decided to spend the night just watching whatever was on TV. I wasn't expecting anything else. I just wanted peace, maybe even boredom. But the world has a cruel way of giving you something to take your mind off your pain, by showing you something worse. It started with shouting. At first I thought it was the TV, some late-night cop show rerun. But when I muted the screen, the sound was still there, sharp and echoing, coming from the parking lot. I pulled the curtain back and saw her. She stood at the far end, under the sickly yellow glow of the streetlight, her arms flailing as she screamed at the clerk I'd seen earlier. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught enough. Everyone needs to get out, you're all going to die. At first, I almost laughed, like maybe she was some drunk picking a fight. But there was something in her voice that cut through me, something raw and desperate. Before I even realized it, I'd stepped outside, lighting a cigarette just to look like I had a reason to be there. Other doors began to crack open. Faces peeked out, voices whispered. A few people stepped onto the walkways, curiosity pulling them closer. And she kept screaming, over and over, about how we had to leave right now, how the police couldn't help, how death was coming for all of us. I remember the way her face looked when the clerk tried to calm her down, how her eyes seemed wide and wild, like she was seeing something no one else could. "The cops will die too," she shouted. And even though part of me wanted to dismiss her as crazy, another part of me, a part already cracked open from heartbreak, felt that crawling itch of doubt. What if she wasn't wrong? The crowd around me shifted uneasily. Parents tugged their kids back inside. A man on the second-floor balcony clutched his car keys like he was ready to bolt. And I just stood there, smoke curling from the end of my cigarette, wondering if I should run too. Then she lunged. One moment she was screaming from a distance. The next she'd crossed the lot and grabbed the clerk's arm with both hands. I thought she was going to hit him, but instead, she bit down hard on his forearm. His scream ripped through the night, louder than hers, and everyone watching gasped. Blood ran down his skin as he tried to tear away, shouting for her to let go. That's when panic hit the crowd. Doors slammed, feet pounded, and I felt my chest tighten with the realization that whatever this was, it wasn't just some harmless outburst. Something terrible was unfolding right in front of me, and I had no idea how far it was going to go. And yet, even as fear pushed me to back away, I couldn't bring myself to turn and run. Some part of me, stupid or brave, I don't know which, needed to see what would happen next. The clerk finally managed to wrench his arm free, shoving her hard enough that she stumbled back and hit the ground. The crowd let out another round of gasps, some people yelling for someone to call the cops, others shouting to get back inside. I just stood there with my cigarette burning down between my fingers, frozen like an idiot. She pushed herself up slowly, her shirt dirty from the gravel, still muttering, still screaming that we didn't understand. "You're all going to die. Don't you get it?" Her voice cracked, raw with panic, and I swear for a second I believed her. The motel manager came running out of the office then, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a pistol clutched in both hands. He aimed it at her, but kept his distance, shouting for her to back off. The sight of the gun made her stop dead in her tracks, her chest heaving as she stared at him. That was when I realized she wasn't crazy in the way I first thought. Her eyes didn't look wild anymore. They looked focused, locked on that weapon like it was proof she'd been right all along. The crowd on the balcony shifted, whispers rising into a nervous buzz. A baby cried. Somewhere above me, a man cursed under his breath and slammed his door shut. Then she did something that chilled me more than the bite, more than the screaming. She turned away from the manager and looked up at the family on the second floor, the couple with the baby. Her voice dropped, softer but somehow sharper. "Give me the child," she begged, her words slicing through the night. "Let me save it. Please, just let me take the baby." The young father stepped forward, blocking the stairs before she could climb. She charged at him, hands outstretched, and he shoved her back hard. She tumbled down the last steps, hit the pavement, and rolled. This time she stayed down for a few seconds, groaning, before pushing herself up again, shaky but still screaming about death, about how no one was listening. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls then, washing over the motel. 2 patrol cars screeched into the lot, sirens chirping as they braked. Relief washed through the crowd. The manager lowered his gun, carefully set it on the ground, and raised his hands to show the officers he wasn't a threat. One cop moved to secure the gun, but the other approached the woman cautiously, hands raised. For a split second, she seemed calmer, even relieved, as if the police would finally help her. But when the officer tried to tell her to settle down, she snapped right back into hysteria. "They won't help you," she screamed, pointing at the cops with a shaking hand. "They'll die too. Don't you see? It's already too late." Her voice cracked into something almost inhuman, a wailing screech that echoed across the lot. She stumbled toward the officer, arm swinging, and he pulled out his taser. He hesitated, shouting for her to stop, but she kept coming. I'll never forget the sound when he fired. The sharp pop, the wires latching onto her. Her body locked mid-run, legs stiff, arms jerking, and she collapsed face first onto the asphalt with a sickening thud. The whole crowd went dead silent. The cops moved in fast, cuffing her wrists while she twitched and moaned. An ambulance pulled in a few minutes later, the red glow joining the police lights. Paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, wrapping gauze around her face where she'd split her lip on the pavement. They loaded her into the back, slammed the doors, and drove off into the night. The police followed close behind, and just like that, the chaos was gone. The manager dusted off his hands and started moving from guest to guest, apologizing, begging people not to check out. "It's all under control," he said over and over. "She was just sick. That's all. Nothing to worry about." But the people weren't buying it. Doors slammed shut, voices murmured, luggage wheels rattled across the pavement. I could see the fear in their faces. They didn't believe she was just sick. Neither did I. I stood there long after the crowd had thinned, staring at the dark patch of asphalt where she'd fallen. The cigarette had burned down to the filter in my hand, and I hadn't even noticed. I dropped it, crushed it with my shoe, and turned back toward my room. Inside, the TV was still frozen on a muted commercial. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, my mind running circles. She'd seemed insane, yes, but she'd also seemed certain. Like whatever she thought was coming wasn't just in her head. That was the part that scared me the most. That a stranger could scream about death in a parking lot and make me, for just a few moments, wonder if maybe she was right. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the pipes, every hum of a car passing on the highway outside, made me flinch. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with her face, eyes wide, begging for the baby, like she was the only one who could save it. When I woke up, the room felt colder somehow, though the heater was still humming. And for the first time since I checked in, I thought maybe I shouldn't stay here. Maybe it was time to pack my things and drive until I found another place. But I didn't. I stayed. And that was the mistake that tied me into everything that happened after. I told myself the night before had just been bad luck. A freak event. A stranger losing her mind. Nothing more. The cops had taken her. The ambulance had driven away. And the manager swore it was all under control. But the next night, as I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the motel itself was some kind of magnet for things like this. By 10 o'clock, the walls were so thin that I could hear muffled voices from the next room. Laughter, the shuffle of bags, kids asking questions. A family must have checked in. For a while, the noise comforted me. Hearing kids bicker about bedtime made the room feel less lonely. I even thought, stupidly, that maybe normal people staying here would chase away the unease. Then there was a knock. At first, I thought it was my door, but the sound came from next door, the family's room. The father's voice carried through the thin wall. "Who is it?" he asked, a little irritated. I pictured him, toothbrush still in his mouth, shuffling to the door in his socks. I didn't hear the answer, but I heard the hesitation in his tone when he opened up. The muffled voices on the other side changed. They weren't kids anymore, and they weren't friendly. Deep male voices. More than one. I muted my TV and pressed my ear against the wall. "Sorry to bother you so late," one man said smoothly, "but we need to come inside. Just a quick conversation." The father's voice stayed polite, but firmer. "Not a good time. My kids are about to go to bed." That's when the tone shifted. A colder voice. "I'm not asking." The scrape of a shoe against the carpet. The creak of the door hinges as it was pushed wider. And then a low, tense silence, broken only by the faint sound of children being hurried toward the bathroom. I should have stopped listening. I should have grabbed my keys, walked out, and left that place behind. But I didn't. I sat frozen, heart hammering, straining to hear every word. The men were inside now. One older voice, calm but commanding. 3 younger ones, quiet but heavy with threat. "Something was left in this room," the older man said. "Something valuable. I know the motel staff didn't touch it. That means you found it. And now you're going to give it back." The mother's voice came next, steady but tight. "We didn't find anything." The room was empty. A pause, then a chuckle, dry and humorless. "Empty, was it? Then one of you is lying. And I don't like liars." I heard the children's bathroom door creak open. My stomach twisted. He called them out. He was asking the kids questions. His tone suddenly warm, almost playful. "You didn't happen to find anything while playing, did you? Maybe something shiny? Something you kept secret?" The little girl whimpered. The boy said nothing. I could almost see him clutching her hand, trying to be brave. Then the older man's voice turned dark again. "Do you understand the position you're putting me in? Do you want your children to see something terrible tonight?" The mother snapped back, her voice shaking with both terror and fury. "You're threatening us in front of our kids. That's already terrible enough." The silence after that was thick. I waited for a blow, a scream, something. But what came instead was softer. The sound of a child's small hand digging into a pocket. The faint jingle of metal. The boy spoke for the first time. "Is this what you mean?" I didn't need to see it to imagine the glint. A ring. Heavy, expensive, maybe with a stone in the center. The older man laughed, low and delighted. That's it. Smart boy. Very smart. The mother whispered something, too soft for me to hear, but her fear came through the wall. I could picture her clutching her daughter close, her eyes locked on the men standing in their room, powerless to stop them. Now, the older man said, voice syrupy sweet. Bring it here. I sat there, jaw clenched, every instinct screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't budge. The boy's footsteps padded softly across the carpet. Then came the man's voice again, amused and cruel. You got guts, kid. Reminds me of me when I was your age. The boy whimpered. The little girl sobbed. And then, just like that, it was over. Chairs scraped. Shoes shuffled. The door opened, then closed again. Silence. I stayed glued to the wall for what felt like forever, my ears straining for the sound of violence, but there was none. Just the soft cries of children and the parents murmuring comfort. The men were gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. I couldn't. The image of that boy handing over the ring, the way the man had laughed, the threat that had hung in the air like smoke, it all stuck to me like tar. By dawn, the family had checked out. I saw them from a window, bags clutched, kids clinging to their parents, their car pulling away fast without even looking back. And just like the night before, I stayed. I stayed even though I knew I shouldn't. I stayed because something told me I hadn't seen the worst of this place yet. The day dragged on like nothing had happened. Cars came and went. The ice machine outside rattled when someone used it, and housekeeping pushed their carts along the walkway, knocking softly before entering rooms. If you didn't know, you'd think it was any other motel on any other day. But I knew. I'd seen too much already to believe in normal here. By evening, I caught myself glancing at the parking lot every few minutes, like I was waiting for something. And sure enough, just after dark it came. A woman brushed past me in the corridor, her shoulder grazing mine as she carried a paper bag of takeout. She didn't apologize, didn't even look at me, just muttered something sharp under her breath, unlocked the door next to mine, and slammed it shut. I thought she was just another rude guest, the kind you run into anywhere. I even smirked to myself, shaking my head. But about an hour later, when I drove down the road to grab some chicken for dinner, I saw a man in the parking lot of the restaurant. He leaned against a pickup, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. When he noticed me, he straightened up quickly, smiling too warmly. Hey, excuse me, he said. His voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. Have you seen my wife? I blinked. What? He pulled a photo up on his phone. A woman with dark hair stared out from the screen, her face tired but pretty. I knew her immediately. The same woman who'd bumped into me and snapped earlier. My new neighbor. She's not well. The man continued. Her parents passed last week. She had a breakdown, drove off. I'm worried sick she might hurt herself. His words were polished, practiced. He looked at me with eyes full of concern. Too full. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to nod, to tell him exactly where she was. But something about his story felt off. Too clean, too packaged, like he'd told it 100 times before. And the way he looked at me when he showed the photo, it wasn't desperate, not really. It was expectant, like he already knew I'd seen her. So I lied. Sorry, man, haven't seen her. He sighed, thanked me, and asked for my number in case I spotted her. I gave it, forcing a smile, and walked back to my car with my food. My gut twisted the whole way back. I didn't go straight into my room. Instead, I stood outside hers and knocked. The curtain twitched before a voice came through the door, low and annoyed. What do you want? It's important, I said quietly, face to face. The door opened a crack. She peered out, eyes sharp, suspicious. When I asked if her parents had died recently, her expression changed instantly. She shook her head. No, her mother was alive. Her father had been gone for years. That's when I told her about the man in the parking lot. Her face drained of color. She shut the door, unlatched it, and opened it wide enough for me to slip inside. The room smelled faintly of cheap soap and fries from the bag on the table. She dropped onto the bed and put her hands over her face. "He found me," she whispered. She wasn't rude now. She wasn't sharp. She was trembling. And little by little, stories spilled out. Years of abuse. Escalating fights, bruises hidden under clothes, threats whispered at night. She'd finally slipped away while he was at work, running with nothing but cash and clothes, hoping he'd never catch up. I sat there, not sure what to say. She looked up at me, eyes shining. "Thank you for lying to him. You don't know what you saved me from." I nodded, but the truth gnawed at me. He'd seen me. He'd seen me recognize her in that photo. And I had a sick feeling he hadn't believed a word of my lie. I left her room eventually, told her to keep the door locked, and went back to mine. For the first time in days, I actually felt good, like I'd done something right. But that feeling didn't last. Around midnight, a crash jolted me upright. Glass shattering, a heavy thud against the wall. Screaming, her screaming. I scrambled to the window, just in time to see him, the man from the restaurant, dragging her across the lot by the arm. She was limp, barely fighting, her legs scraping against the gravel as he hauled her toward the truck. "Hey!" I shouted without thinking. My voice cracked the night. Other doors burst open. Guests spilled out, shouting, some rushing forward. A man in flannel pajamas charged him, yelling to let her go. Another joined. He swung wildly, fist connecting with one of them. But then a third man tackled him from the side. The woman dropped to the ground, crumpling like a rag doll. For a second, I thought they'd killed him. But he scrambled free, panic replacing his fake charm. He dove into his truck, engine roaring, tires screeching as he sped off into the night. The woman lay on the pavement, swollen cheek, blood at the corner of her mouth, eyes fluttering. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Another dialed 911. I just stood there, stomach churning, realizing exactly how he'd found her. He'd followed me. He'd watched me come back to the motel and knock on her door. I thought I'd helped her. Instead, I'd led him straight to her. When the cops arrived, the whole lot was flashing red and blue again. Paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, wheeled her into the ambulance. She was awake, barely, but didn't look at anyone. The truck door slammed, and she was gone. The crowd thinned, muttering, shaking heads, retreating into rooms. I walked back inside mine with lead in my chest. The echo of her scream burned into my ears. For hours, I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying it all, wishing I'd never knocked, wishing I'd never spoken to him, wishing I'd left this place the first night, like I should have. By morning, it felt like the whole motel had shifted. The faces I passed in the walkway, the way the clerk avoided eye contact, even the dull hum of the neon sign outside. All of it seemed weighed down, like the place itself carried a memory of the night before. I couldn't shake it either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her being dragged, her legs scraping the gravel, and the awful realization that I'd led him straight to her. I thought about leaving again, really thought about it this time. I even packed a few things I had into my duffel and tossed it on the bed. But when I stood there staring at the zipper, something kept me from picking it up. Call it guilt, call it morbid curiosity. I just couldn't drive away. By late afternoon, the motel looked quiet again. Too quiet. Most of the cars had gone. The lot stretched out, half empty, with the sun throwing long shadows across it. That's when I noticed the kid. He couldn't have been more than 6. Small, skinny, hair sticking up in all directions. He was pacing back and forth in front of one of the doors, wearing a faded t-shirt that looked 2 sizes too big. At first I figured his parents were inside, maybe grabbing something. But after 10 minutes of him shuffling up and down the same stretch of walkway, head down, arms hanging limply at his sides, I started to wonder. I leaned against the railing and called over. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" He looked at me for a second, blank-eyed, and shrugged. "Don't know where my mom and dad are." His voice was flat, almost too calm for a kid his age. Something about the way he said it unsettled me. I glanced around. No adults in sight, just him and me. I walked closer, keeping my voice light. "What room are you in?" He pointed at the door he'd been pacing in front of. "Number 14. I knocked. No answer. Knocked again, louder. Still nothing. That's when the clerk appeared from the office, frowning, keys jangling on his belt. "What's going on?" "This kid's looking for his parents," I told him. "They in there?" The clerk checked his logbook. "Room was rented last night. Couple with a kid. Paid cash." He tried the door. Locked. He hesitated for a second, then muttered, "Screw it," and slid his master key in. The moment the door cracked open, I smelled it. Not the rot of something long dead, but sharp and metallic, like copper, like fresh blood. The clerk froze. Then he pushed the door wider, and the three of us saw inside. The bed was a mess, sheets tangled and stained dark. Drawers were pulled open, clothes strewn across the floor. A lamp lay shattered beside the nightstand, its bulb cracked in half. And on the wall above the bed were tiny red flecks, like someone had flicked paint from a brush. Only it wasn't paint. The clerk swore under his breath and quickly pulled the door shut, blocking the kid's view. He looked at me, his face pale. "We need to call this in." The boy just stood there, staring at the closed door, not moving, not asking questions. It was like he already knew. The police arrived 20 minutes later. The first deputies went in with flashlights, their radios crackling. Another came out with a notebook, peppering us with questions. When had we seen the boy? Did we hear anything the night? Had anyone been hanging around? I told them the truth, which wasn't much. The kid sat in the office lobby while all this happened. Someone gave him crayons and paper, maybe to distract him. I walked by once and glanced at his drawing. A bed, red scribbles covering it. I swallowed hard and kept walking. The guests gathered in little knots, whispering, peeking toward room 14 before being shooed away. One woman in room 6 said she'd heard a loud bang around midnight, but thought it was just someone dropping luggage. Now she wasn't so sure. By the time Child Protective Services came for the boy, the place was crawling with cops. They carried out bags of evidence, sheets, clothes, even the mattress. When they finally gave the all clear, the room looked stripped bare. The woman who came for the boy knelt down, talking gently to him, holding his hand as she led him outside. He didn't look back once. I stood on the walkway, watching them leave, feeling a weight sink deeper in my gut. I didn't know what had happened in that room, but I knew enough. His parents weren't coming back. That night, when things quieted down, I walked past room 14 again. The door was shut tight, a faint outline left on the carpet where the bed had been. The wall still carried a stain no amount of scrubbing had erased. I thought about the boy's flat voice, the way he'd paced outside like he already understood, and I realized I'd never forget it. Just like I'd never forget the woman screaming about death, or the family forced to hand over a ring. The motel wasn't just unlucky. It wasn't coincidence. Bad things clung to this place like mold on damp wood. And for some reason, I was still here, watching it all unfold. I told myself one more night, just one more, then I'd leave. But I didn't. The next night, I sat at the desk in my room with the curtains half open, staring out at the parking lot like it was a stage. I told myself I was just watching out of curiosity. But the truth was, I was waiting. Every night something had happened, and a part of me was sure it wasn't over. Around 9, the quiet hum of tires on gravel broke the silence. A sedan rolled into the lot and parked under the flickering light. A man stepped out, middle-aged, bundled in a heavy coat, despite the mild weather, a red wool hat pulled down low. He looked ordinary, kind of guy you wouldn't glance at twice in a grocery store. That ordinariness almost made him stranger than the rest. He came into the office, smiling politely, card in hand. I couldn't hear the words from my room, but I saw the clerk's expression shift, irritation giving way to confusion. The man tried the card again, and again, each time leaning in, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Finally, he pulled out a wad of cash and handed it over. The clerk nodded, counted, and slid him a key. Room 6. The man thanked him with that same wide smile, then carried his bag down the walkway, glancing around like he was taking stock of the place. For just a second, his eyes flicked up toward the second floor, toward me. Maybe. But then he disappeared into his room. I thought nothing of it at first. People checked in late all the time. But hours passed, and he never came back out. Not for ice, not for food, Not for anything. Just silence behind that door. I tried to sleep, but the motel had taught me better by now. Sure enough, just after midnight, headlights swung across my window. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled in, parking sharp and deliberate. 3 deputies climbed out, scanning the lot like they already knew what they were looking for. I cracked my curtain and watched as one came into the office. A moment later, the clerk stepped out, pointing down the walkway toward room 6. The deputies moved in quiet, guns drawn, their boots crunching on the gravel. One of them tried the knob, locked. The clerk handed over the master key, and they eased the door open, slow and careful. I leaned closer, holding my breath. The room was empty. The bedspread was pulled back, a pair of muddy boots on the carpet. A half-full bottle of water sat on the nightstand, but no sign of the man in the red hat. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Credit card declined. Flagged. They'd been watching for it. He must have seen the patrol cars and slipped out the back window before they got here. The deputies searched, bagging the water bottle, the boots, even the sheets. One of them carried out a black duffel. The clerk's face went pale as the zipper was pulled back. I couldn't see inside, but the whisper that carried down the walkway was clear enough. Wigs, different colors, different lengths, and not the cheap kind. Real hair. One deputy muttered something about missing women. A match, DNA testing. The others shut him up quickly, eyes flicking toward me and the others who had come out to watch. The man in the red hat had been standing right there, not 12 hours earlier. I'd seen him smile, watched him thank the clerk, listened to his friendly tone, and the whole time, he might have been carrying trophies. Hair that once belonged to someone who never made it home. The thought chilled me more than the screaming woman, more than the bloody room, more than the family forced to hand over a ring. At least with them. A horror had been out in the open. With him, it was hidden behind that smile, tucked neatly in a bag at his side. The deputy stayed until nearly 3 in the morning, combing every inch of the room. When they finally left, the motel went quiet again. Too quiet. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The image of that red had burned into my mind. He could be anywhere by now. On the highway, at a gas station, smiling at someone new, asking for directions, holding out his card like he belonged. And I realized something that made my skin crawl. I'd been watching the motel like it was cursed, like all these terrible things were drawn to it. But maybe it wasn't the place at all. Maybe it was just people. Ordinary people with smiles and polite voices and stories that sounded true until you scratched the surface. They walked into places like this every day. Checked in, paid cash, slept in rooms next to families, students, drifters like me. You never really knew who they were until it was too late. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red hat, that smile, the bag zipped shut with God knows what inside. It wasn't just the horror of it. It was how normal he'd seemed. I kept thinking about how I might have nodded to him in passing, maybe even said hello if our paths had crossed. That thought unsettled me more than anything. By the time the sky outside began to lighten, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. Enough was enough. I stuffed my clothes into the duffel, zipped it up, and carried it to the door. My hand was on the knob, ready to turn it, when something stopped me. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a knock. It was a thought, simple and stupid, but sharp enough to freeze me. If I left, I'd never know. I'd never know if the woman who screamed about death had been seeing something none of us could. I'd never know what happened to the family with the ring, or if the boy who handed it over grew up remembering that night. I'd never know if the runaway wife made it out alive, or if she was dragged back into the shadows she'd escaped. I'd never know what the kid from room 14 had really seen before he paced alone in front of that door. And I'd never know who the man in the red hat truly was, or how many lives he had already touched before ours. The bag slid from my hand and thumped softly against the carpet. I sat back on the bed, heart pounding, knowing I was making the dumbest decision of my life. But I stayed. The motel felt different now. Not just unlucky. Not just a place where things happened. It felt alive in a way, like the walls had soaked up every scream, every secret, every lie. and were holding them just beneath the surface. Whenever I walked past the rooms, I could almost feel them looking back at me. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Scratches on doors that didn't look like accidents. Burn marks on the carpet. Too black and too many to be just cigarettes. Names carved into the underside of the wooden railing. Initials etched deep, like people wanted to leave proof they'd been there. And the clerk, he was different too. The night after the red hat man disappeared, I caught him staring at me. Not with suspicion, more like curiosity. Like he knew I'd seen too much, but wanted to see how much more I could take. "Rough week," he muttered as I passed. That was all. No smile, no explanation. Just those two words. I nodded, but my stomach knotted. By now, the motel was nearly empty. Most guests had cleared out after the blood. The cops, the ambulance runs. A handful stayed, though, and I began to wonder about them. Who chooses to remain in a place where so many bad things happen in such a short time? Were they just desperate like me, or something else entirely? That night, I kept the TV off and the curtains open. The parking lot glowed under the neon sign, buzzing faintly, and the long row of doors stretched out in both directions. Nothing happened for hours. Midnight came and went. Still nothing. But around 2, I heard it. Faint footsteps in the walkway, slow and dragging. I leaned toward the glass, peering out. A figure moved past my window. Tall, thin, head bowed. I thought about opening the door, calling out, asking if they were okay. But something in me resisted. I stayed silent, just watching. The figure stopped in front of room 14. The same room with the blood, the same room stripped bare. It stood there unmoving. The hairs on my arms lifted. It wasn't the kid. I knew that instantly. This was taller, older. The way it stood, stiff and shadowed, made my skin crawl. After what felt like forever, it turned slowly and walked away, fading into the far end of the lot where the lights didn't reach. I sat back, my pulse hammering, whispering to myself that I must have imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I'd seen someone or something stand in front of that cursed door like they belonged to it. By dawn, I was still awake, still sitting there with my eyes locked on room 14. That was when I realized something important. This place wasn't just a backdrop where things happened by chance. It was the common thread, the stage, and I was sitting in the middle of it, night after night, waiting for the next act whether I wanted it or not. And the worst part? I couldn't look away anymore. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I hadn't left that chair in days. My eyes burned, my thoughts scattered, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was circling closer to some answer, even if I didn't know what the question was. I tried walking it off. I left the room, stepped into the cool morning air, and wandered the lot like I owned the place. The motel was mostly silent, doors shut, curtains drawn, a few cars that hadn't moved in days. The ice machine clanked when I passed it, as if mocking me. When I reached room 14, I stopped. The door looked ordinary, chipped paint, brass number plate dulled with age. But I couldn't forget the boy pacing outside it, or the smell when the clerk opened it, or the faint stain on the wall. I put my hand on the doorknob without thinking. Cold metal pressed against my skin. For a second I thought about trying it, just to see if it was locked, just to know. "Don't." The voice came from behind me. I turned. It was the cleaner, an older woman I'd seen pushing her cart around earlier. Short, gray hair tucked under a bandana, face weathered like someone who'd spent her whole life in the sun. She looked at me hard, like she already knew what I was about to do. "Why not?" I asked. "Some doors you don't open again," she said simply, then turned her cart and kept walking. Her words clung to me as I made my way back to my room. I wanted to laugh them off, but I couldn't. They felt too true. That evening, I sat outside on the walkway with a coffee, trying to act normal. The clerk shuffled past, headed for the office. I caught his eye. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I asked. He smirked, shrugged. "Somebody's got to keep it running. But all the stuff that happens here." His smirk faded, and for a moment I thought he might actually say something real. But then he shook his head. "Every place has stories. Ours just get louder." He disappeared into the office. leaving me with that cryptic answer rattling around in my head. That night, I told myself nothing was going to happen. The lot was quiet. The handful of guests who were left had their curtains drawn. Midnight passed without incident, but around 1, I heard a door open. I leaned forward, peering through the thin curtain. Down the walkway, Room 11's door swung wide, and a man stepped out. He looked ordinary at first, balding, a little heavy, carrying a duffel, but instead of heading for his car, he just stood there, scanning the lot. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward me. I froze. The curtain was barely open, just a sliver, but it was enough. Our eyes met. His face didn't change, didn't even twitch. He just stared. For what felt like minutes, we stayed like that. Him on the walkway, me behind the curtain, both of us perfectly still. Finally, he broke it. He lifted a hand, not to wave, not to point, just lifted it slowly, palm facing me. Then he turned, walked back into his room, and shut the door. I didn't sleep after that. I barely moved. I sat on the edge of the bed, ears straining for footsteps, for doors, for anything, but nothing came. By morning, I stepped outside cautiously, half expecting to see him waiting, but the lot was empty. His car was gone. Room 11's door was closed. I asked the clerk later if someone had checked out. He glanced at the logbook, then shook his head. Nobody in that room. I stared at him, waiting for a smirk or some hint of a joke, but there was nothing, just flat certainty. I walked back to my room, pulse pounding, and sat down hard on the bed. I'd come here thinking the motel was just bad luck, a magnet for broken people and ugly situations. But the more I stayed, the more I felt it, like the place itself was bending things, pulling them in, twisting them until they broke. And maybe I was part of it now. Maybe that was why I couldn't leave, even when I told myself I would. Maybe the motel wasn't just a backdrop for horror stories. Maybe it was the story, and I was trapped inside it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The motel wasn't just unlucky. It wasn't just coincidence. It was deliberate. Too many things had piled up in too short a time, too perfectly strung together. It felt like the walls were listening, like the cracked pavement of the lot carried secrets under the surface. I thought about the woman in the parking lot, how she screamed that we'd all die, about the family forced to hand over the ring, about the wife dragged across the gravel, the boy outside room 14, the man in the red hat with his duffel full of wigs. None of it had come from the same direction, none of it connected by logic, but every single thread ran through the same place, this motel. And now I was caught in it too. The idea sat in my head all day, turning over and over, until I felt restless. I couldn't sit in the room anymore. I had to test it, like poking at a sore tooth. That evening, I walked the length of the lot slowly, pretending I was just stretching my legs. My eyes scanned the doors, the windows, the shadows beneath the buzzing lamps. Every creak of the wooden walkway made me tense. When I passed room 14 again, I didn't try the door this time, but I did kneel down and look close. On the frame, near the bottom hinge, there were faint scratches. Not the kind you'd make with a key or a coin. These were deeper, more desperate, like fingernails dragged again and again until they broke. My stomach flipped. I stood quickly, looking around, half expecting someone to be watching me. But the walkway was empty. I moved on, forcing myself toward the far end of the lot, where the lights didn't quite reach. The shadows thickened there, swallowing the last two rooms almost completely. I stopped just short of them, heart thudding. Something about the darkness at that end didn't feel natural. It was too heavy, too still, like the air itself didn't want me there. I turned back before I could lose my nerve. Later that night, as I sat with the TV on mute, I heard footsteps again, slow, dragging. I froze, the memory of the figure outside room 14 fresh in my head. I went to the curtain and peeked out. Nothing, just the lot under the glow of the neon. I let out a shaky breath, about to turn away when the TV flickered. The screen went from a commercial to static, though I hadn't touched the remote. Then, faintly, a voice crackled through it. Not clear, not full sentences, but fragments. A woman's voice. Out now. They'll die. I staggered back, heart pounding. The same words. The same warning from the woman in the parking lot. I fumbled with the remote, pressing buttons, trying to change the channel. Nothing worked. The screen stayed gray and buzzing, the voice warping in and out. Finally, I yanked the cord from the wall. The static cut off instantly, plunging the room into silence. I stood there shaking, staring at the dead screen, listening to my own breath. That night I didn't even bother lying down. I sat with my back to the wall, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything, to come through it. By dawn, nothing had. But that didn't make me feel safer. It made me feel like whatever was circling this place wasn't done yet. The next day, the cleaner passed me again on the walkway. She paused this time, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You should have left when you had the chance." I wanted to ask her how much she knew, what she'd seen in all her years working here. But before I could, she pushed her cart along, not looking back. Her words hit me harder than the static voice, harder than the shadows at the far end, because deep down, I already knew she was right. But by then, leaving didn't feel like an option anymore. It felt like the motel had its hooks in me, pulling me deeper each night, and I couldn't tell if I wanted to fight it, or if part of me wanted to see how far it went. I didn't pack again. I didn't even pretend this time. My duffel sat in the corner, forgotten, clothes spilling out like it had been waiting for me to make up my mind. The truth was, I already had. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. That night, I left the lights off and sat by the window in the dark, staring out at the lot. The neon buzzed overhead, throwing its red glow across the cracked pavement. The room stretched in both directions like a row of silent mouths, waiting to open, and one by one they did. At first it was just a flicker of movement at the far end, a figure stepping out of a doorway, then another, 2 doors down, then another. Within minutes, the walkway was dotted with people. I pressed my forehead to the glass, breath fogging it. I knew them, all of them. The screaming woman, her white shirt stained at the shoulder where she'd bitten the clerk. The family from next door, the boy clutching the ring in a small hand, the mother's face drawn tight with fear. The runaway wife, cheeks swollen, eyes hollow. The boy from room 14, pacing back and forth in the same small stretch. The man in the red hat, smiling, duffel at his side. They moved slowly, drifting, their steps perfectly in sync though they never looked at each other. Their eyes were on me. I stumbled back from the window, heart slamming, whispering to myself that it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when I blinked, they were still there, filling the walkway, the lot, every space outside my room. The TV flicked on behind me, static crackling. Voices poured through, overlapping, tangled together. All the stories at once, screams, whispers, pleas, laughter. The ring clinking against wood, a baby crying, the bite of teeth into skin. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside me, vibrating through my bones. The door rattled. My head snapped up. The knob twisted, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, every muscle locked, waiting for it to burst open. But it didn't. The rattling stopped. The silence pressed in. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps that shook the frame. I staggered toward the bed, grabbed the duffel, and yanked it onto my shoulder. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, I wanted out. Desperately. I didn't care where, didn't care how far. I just wanted to drive until the motel was a memory. But when I grabbed the knob and pulled the door open, the lot was empty. No woman, no family, no wife, no boy, no man in the red hat. Just the buzzing neon and the stretch of cracked pavement under the dark sky. I stood there shaking, duffel strap biting into my shoulder, waiting for something to move, for someone to step out. But nothing did. And then, without meaning to, I laughed. A short, cracked sound that startled even me. Because I finally understood. The motel wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't even alive, not in the way we think of it. It was a mirror. Every person who walked through its doors brought something with them. Fear, guilt, rage, secrets. And the motel simply showed it back. Not in dreams, not in whispers, but in flesh and blood and screams. It didn't create horror, it revealed it. That was why I stayed. That was why I couldn't leave. Because I had brought something with me too. Something broken. Something raw. The motel had been waiting to show me what that looked like. And when it did, I wasn't sure I'd survive it. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty lot, the hum of the sign filling the silence. Then I shut the door, dropped the duffel on the floor, and sat back on the bed. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The motel still had more to show me. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to see it.